Welcome to Daily Dose Radio, a 5-minute devotional podcast studying the Psalms verse by verse. Broadcast from the ever-beautiful Sharonville, Ohio, on the sunny side of Cincinnati. If you're looking for 5-minute Bible study, you found it. This is your home for Daily Dose Radio. 5 minutes every day through the Psalter, verse by verse. And this week, we're looking at the second half of Psalm 106. Today, we're going to be reading verses 30 through 34. And let me read those for you. Then stood up Phinehas and executed judgment, and so the plague was stayed. And that was counted unto him for righteousness unto all generations forevermore. And they angered him also at the waters of strife, so that it went ill with Moses for their sakes, because they provoked his spirit, so that he spake unadvisedly with his lips. They did not destroy the nations, concerning whom the Lord commanded them. That's verses 30 through 34, and you can see how this long litany of transgressions and rebellions is given here. And ladies and gentlemen, this is just not the people of Israel, this is us as well. Verse 30 through 34 gives us a little more history, though. We have Phinehas mentioned. If we go back to Numbers chapter 25, I mentioned yesterday, Numbers chapter 25, the sin at Baal Peor. The people had intermarried and had sexual relations with the Midianites and the Moabite women. They had, gone away from what the Lord told them to do. They sacrificed to Baal at Peor. They engaged in the sacrificial meal there at Peor. And then something happens. Well, if you look at chapter 25 in the book of Numbers, it says the anger of the Lord was turned against them. So he's angry with them. We don't hear about the plague starting, but we hear about the plague ending. In verse 6, of chapter 25 of the book of Numbers, somebody brings in a Midianitish woman, and he's going to do with her as he pleases, and he flaunts her in front of the weeping people. They're at the door of the tabernacle, and they're crying out to God to stop the plague. They're repenting of their sin, and here comes this man flaunting his sin. He shows off this woman, and he takes her to his tent. Well, Phinehas follows, and Phinehas destroys the couple and stays the plague, and that's what's being referenced here in verse 30. In verse 31, it's counted unto him for righteousness. If you look at verses 10 through 13, you'll find that the Lord speaks to Moses and says, because Phinehas has done this, I've turned away from my wrath against the children of Israel. So he gives him this covenant of peace and establishes his lineage as priest from then on. Then we have a change. In verse 32, 33, and 34, we have this story about Moses at the waters of strife. Remember when Moses struck the rock twice? The Lord said, speak to the rock. He didn't speak to the rock. He struck the rock. And he wasn't supposed to do that. So we have that here. And whose fault is it? Well, it's the people's fault because they angered him so much that he lost his temper and did according to his will instead of the Lord's will. And that always happens, doesn't it? When we lose our temper, very seldom when we lose our temper do we do anything that's right in God's sight. It's a danger for us to lose our temper, to fall into that trap. Well, it happens to Moses, and he, of course, becomes an example for us of why we shouldn't do that. They did not destroy the nations concerning whom the Lord commanded them. This looks forward to what's going to happen in the land when they get there, because they're going to take the land. There's going to be a conquest that they're a part of, but it's only going to be partial. There are going to be some, like the Kenites, who they don't destroy, because they weren't careful about what they were doing. Now, next time, verses 35 through 39, we're going to talk about once they're in the land, this is the period of some of the kings and what happens during that time. So I hope you'll join me tomorrow as we look at verses 35 through 39 on Daily Dose Radio. Thanks for listening to Daily Dose Radio. I'm David Smith. The music today has been performed by the Bluegrass Experiment. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next time on Daily Dose Radio.